Joining us, and I'm glad to have you with us today. So much to talk
Well,
about.
pleasure to
I
be
want to,
on with you, Leslie.
always good to have you with us, buddy. You've written so many great pieces. The latest, entitled "Institutional Anarchy Prevails in the GOP House." Um, I want to talk about this because you're writing specifically where not too long after the Republicans become a majority in the House, in the U.S. House of Representatives, that Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, pretty much, you wrote, lobbed a hand grenade into the GOP caucus bunker. And you say this with her announcement that the U.S. could default on its debt this week unless the government takes extraordinary steps and Congress raises the national debt limit. Speak to us about this anarchy and speak to us about where this puts, things. Because as a Democrat, I will frequently say, Republicans said if they got the House, life was going to be so wonderful. So I'm kind of wondering what's going on if the United States is going to default on its debt under their watch, not Democrats and a majority of Democrats in the House, but a majority of Republicans. Speak to me.
Well, yeah, Secretary Yellen announced 2 weeks ago that unless the United States government takes what she called extraordinary measures, the government could default on its debt and shut down. She, in the meantime, has announced a series of, it's essentially paper shuffling and to make sure the government can continue working, even though we passed the debt limit last week. But unless Congress passes a debt increase in the debt limit by sometime this summer in June, there'll have to be a government shutdown, which would have enormously bad ramifications for the economy, the credit of the United States, and people who are living on their Social Security checks.
Well, this is a serious challenge to the new Speaker, Kevin McCarthy. Is McCarthy in a situation where he has to work with Democrats and even more so has to work with President Biden on this?
Well, this is a really tough one for McCarthy to handle. I said in the article that if the fight over the debt limit goes anything like his battle to become Speaker, we're all in serious trouble. Because there aren't any 15 ballots on this thing. If they don't do something by June, the government's going to have to shut down. And he's in a very poor position to deal with it. What a lot of the hardcore Republicans want out of this is basically to deal a fatal blow to Social Security and Medicare. They hate the program. They see it as government interference. They think the federal government's spending too much money on old and sick people. So they just want to kill the program. And essentially what they're doing is holding seniors hostage and saying basically, unless you make changes in the programs to limit the spending, we're going to shut down the federal government, which would leave, old people and sick people high and dry. On the other hand, if McCarthy insists on taking that position and limitations on Social Security and Medicare spending as a price for passing the debt limit, there are about 15 to 20 Republican House members who would have real problems with that. Because they live in districts that voted for Joe Biden. A good example would be someone like Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's a Republican representative from Western Pennsylvania, where he has a large population of seniors in his district. Fitzpatrick, if he voted for Social Security and Medicare cuts, would not be reelected in 2024. But on the other hand, there are these hardcore types like the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world who want to basically dismantle Social Security and Medicare. And in some ways, McCarthy's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. He has to find a way to reconcile the two wings of the Republican Party. And honestly, I don't think he has the same political and legislative skills that Nancy Pelosi had And Pelosi was always managed to find a way out of these situations where she was caught between the party's moderates and the left wing of the party. But I don't think McCarthy has the skills to carry this off. And his lack of skills in negotiating compromise could, have devastating results on the economy and on senior citizens.
A couple of things here, because you said so much, so there's so much to unpack, and I have so many questions. First off, do you find this is political suicide? Because some of these GOP members, well, first of all, with baby boomers, the majority of the population is getting older with numbers, in the United States. And certainly, those numbers, bleed into the voter demographic. So one. And, two, based on that, we're seeing in, so many of these districts, especially Republican districts, that they're screwing their own constituents. So is this, first off, first question, is this political suicide for anybody in the GOP to, hurt such a growing voter base in the United States?
Well, the short answer and the problem is that if you look at the right wing of the Republican Party, again, people like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jim Jordan, they don't care whether they want the government to shut down. I said basically that in the article that the chaos and confusion in the Republican House of Horrors could haunt the GOP in 2024 because it is political suicide. But a lot of them don't care. They're not.
And when you say a lot, Brad, when you say a lot of them don't care, are you talking about the far right faction of the GOP and those people who fought against McCarthy? I mean, you write in your piece quite accurately, and I quote, "If the battle over the federal debt limit is anything like McCarthy's battle for the speakership, the economy and the nation are in grave danger." And that's a good point, because McCarthy doesn't have a majority in the Senate. The Democrats are the majority, right? Because you were talking about Speaker Pelosi, right? She's the majority in both chambers. He does not, right? One. Two, and he doesn't have the unity within his party, in the chamber and the backing, and he doesn't have, it would seem, the diplomacy to work with Democrats. We're going to take a break. When we come back, think about your answer to that. And when we come back, we'll continue to talk about that and many other issues that you have written about as well. We're going to talk about also what the U.S. hitting the debt ceiling could mean for you and for me, the normal, average Joe and Jane Q public. I'm Leslie Marshall. Brad Bannon is our guest. Like I said, every Monday he hosts Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Also writes a political column each week for The Hill. Please read his Institutional Anarchy Prevails in the GOP House that we're talking about right now. If you don't get The Hill or don't know anything about The Hill, you can just go straight to Brad's columns at muckrack.com/Brad-Bannon. You can also watch full shows of Deadline DC at periscope.tv/Brad Bannon. And on Twitter, follow him there. He's posting it there. We post it on my website at Leslie Marshall, Twitter page, but also Brad Bannon at Brad Bannon. I'm Leslie Marshall. We'll be back with him. We'll be back with you right after this. Don't go away.
If you came across someone struggling with hunger, how would you recognize them? By their clothes, their age, the way they speak? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a single father of 2 who works 3
part-time jobs and still can't put enough food on the table?
Or maybe a mother who cleans offices at night,
hoping to find meeting leftovers to take home to her hungry family?
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time
landing a job and getting back on his feet.
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. People you pass by every day but never knew were hungry. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America, 200 Food Banks Strong, and the Ad Council.
Mama, what does the chicken say?
Chicken. Oh, okay.
And wolf?
Oh, a wolf. Ooh!
What about the tiny dog? Cat? dolphin? What does the turkey say? A whale.
Yeah, whale sound.
Do the giraffe.
Giraffe, really? Okay.
Giraffe.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff, like making sure your kids are buckled correctly in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right.
Visit nhtsa.gov/
the right seat.
Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1874. That was the day Arturo Alfonso Schomburg was born. Schomburg was an important figure in the Harlem Renaissance. He is also considered a premier historian and collector of material on black life in America. Born and raised in Puerto Rico, he arrived in the United States in 1891 and soon settled into the Cuban and Puerto Rican working class neighborhoods of New York City. Schomburg initially involved himself in the Cuban and Puerto Rican independence movements. When he traveled to New Orleans, he experienced Jim Crow discrimination and witnessed black disenfranchisement firsthand. He reacted strongly to the increased racial tensions, lynchings, and race riots of the period, and believed that history must restore what slavery took away. In 1911, Schomburg and his friend John Edward Bruce founded the Negro Society for Historical Research and established lasting friendships with intellectuals like W.E.B. Du Bois. He worked for the inclusion of black history into the educational system and continued to amass a wide collection of literature, art, books, pamphlets, and manuscripts on black life and history. His collection spanned materials from across the globe. It included letters of Haitian revolutionary Toussaint Louverture, poetry by Phyllis Wheatley, artifacts from Frederick Douglass, and other black leaders. Schomburg's private collection became the basis for the 135th Street branch of the New York Public Library's Division of Negro Literature, History, and Prints, which opened
Ready. We're back. I'm Leslie Marshall. He's Brad Bannon. He's president and CEO of Bannon Communications Research. Follow him on Twitter at Brad Bannon. You can also check out on Mondays Deadline DC with Brad Bannon right here, every Monday, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you miss it live, you can also see Deadline DC at periscope.tv/Brad Bannon. Follow him on Twitter at Brad Bannon and check out his weekly columns for The Hill. You can read them at muckrack.com/Brad-Bannon or go to The Hill. We're talking about his latest piece for The Hill entitled Institutional Anarchy Prevails in the GOP House. And we are talking about the dilemma that Speaker Kevin McCarthy has. And this was a concern many of us had when we saw, over a dozen times in his battle for speakership, what would happen with our nation and with the economy. Our nation could be in grave danger. Brad, thank you for holding. Welcome back. Sure. So I was asking you if those like Marjorie Taylor Greene and the far right want to dismantle Medicare and Social Security. McCarthy doesn't have the unity in his House. McCarthy doesn't have the unity in his party, and McCarthy doesn't have control, GOP control, in both the House and the Senate. Obviously, Democrats, thankfully, have the majority in the Senate. So where does this leave him, and where does it leave we, the American people, the taxpayers?
Well, it leaves us taxpayers in a very precarious position. If government shuts down, there are a couple of things that could cause immediate problems. One is that if the United States can't pay off of its debts, interest rates are about to soar. So if you think mortgage rates are high now, and certainly in places like California and New York, they're very high, interest rates for houses could go way up, even higher than they are now. The other thing that you would see happen is there's the possibility that seniors wouldn't receive their Social Security checks because the government wouldn't have the money to issue them. And there are just all sorts of bad things. And eventually, depending upon how long the shutdown was, companies are laying off employees now, especially in the high-tech industry, and you could see more corporate layoffs. So, nothing good comes from a government shutdown, but the right wing of the Republican Party, who, basically control McCarthy, don't care. They're anarchists. If you look at somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's going to win re-election. She's in a safe Republican district, whether the government shuts down or not. Probably people like Matt Gaetz and Jim Jordan are same category. The late great Speaker of the House of Representatives, Sam Rayburn, used to say there are two kinds of legislators, and he used this story to describe them. Any jackass can kick down a barn, but it takes a carpenter to build one. And basically what you have in the GOP House caucus is a bunch of jackasses. I don't know if I can say that on the air. I probably can. But they just don't care.
You just did.
Oh, yeah, I just did. And they don't care. They would love to see the government shut down because they're just nihilists, basically.
Yeah, but Brad, I hear you, and maybe playing devil's advocate or just throwing something in here. But if they love to see the government shut down, it's on them. We know that the party in power gets blamed for economic issues. And right now the party in power, at least in the House, are the Republicans, and Republicans have seen this before, where even when Democrats have been in power, that they've been blamed because they're the ones saying, we want to cut down, we want to take a hatchet to Medicare and Social Security. We don't want to raise the debt ceiling. We want to let the government shut down. Republicans historically have been blamed for that, especially when they're in power in the House. So again, political suicide. So although it's terrible for the American people, is it a good thing for the Democrats?
Oh, yeah, I think it would be a great thing for the Democrats. And my guess is Kevin McCarthy knows it would cause his party problems, but he doesn't have the power within his caucus to stop it.
Right.
Because, he's in a position where he can't afford to lose more than 4 votes on any given piece of legislation. And if you add together the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world and the Matt Gaetz and the Jim Jordan and the other crazies, there are like 15 or 20 of them. Right. And McCarthy doesn't have the power or the legislative skills to do anything about it. So my guess is if it was up to Kevin McCarthy, he wouldn't shut down the government over Social Security because he realizes it was bad for the party. But the people he's empowered in the caucus, the chaos caucus, I call them, just don't care.
Well, let's talk about people who are watching and listening who do care, and let's talk about what the U.S. hitting the debt ceiling means for the American taxpayer. I mean, the U.S. is hitting the debt ceiling of $31.4 trillion. That raises concerns economically about what happens if lawmakers can't reach a deal to pay the U.S. government's debt. You mentioned Janet Yellen. You mentioned the Treasury Department has begun using a series of extraordinary measures. And Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said she doesn't anticipate Americans will feel the effects of this before June, but if Republicans don't work with Democrats, work with the president to raise that debt ceiling, Americans will. So what happens to the average, Joe and Jane Q public, the average taxpayer, if the U.S. hits the debt ceiling? What effects is she talking about that will happen at least in June and going forward into the summer, the rest of the summer?
Well, one thing that would happen is Wall Street would drop big time if the government shuts down.
So anybody who has money invested in IRAs,
if you have an IRA or a 401k,
kids' education,
it's going to take a dive. And so again, people depending upon their IRAs for retirement or looking forward to retirement are going to get seriously hurt because the market's going to drop, which means retirement funds are going to drop. The price of the interest rate on mortgages is going to go up. The United States won't be able to pay its bills. Maybe Social Security recipients can't even get their payments every month. And it will probably cause a lot of people, millions of Americans, to lose their jobs because unemployment will go up. It's just an economic nightmare, basically.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, obviously Kevin McCarthy isn't an idiot. He wants to keep total idiot. He wants to keep his position. So what does he do? Because at the end of the day, although it took 15 times, he had a majority. Can he whip up enough support in his own party, to work across the aisle? Because it does seem in the 11th hour, things usually get rectified regardless of who's in power quickly. Well, you know what? We don't have time. Brad. I don't want to cut you off. Let's take a break. When we come back, you can answer that. And then we're going to talk about those financial markets that you had touched upon. We're going to talk about those 401ks that I mentioned and more with Brad Bannon, Bannon Communications Research President and CEO. Also writes a political column for The Hill. Check it out. You can read his columns at muckrack.com/Brad-Bannon. Watch full shows of Deadline DC. He does it here live every Monday, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern, and you can check it out at periscope.tv/Brad Bannon. Follow him on Twitter at Brad Bannon. Back after this.
The Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council present the story of Tom and Levi.
Tom is the smartest man I know. He's been a professor at 2 major universities, been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, he told me that he was having problems in his classes. I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. And he was telling them that he was doing it as a favor to them, but I think in reality, he just wanted to get out of there. I was really starting to worry because I saw something was wrong.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me, and my love for him was just immense.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
What grows in the forest? Trees? Sure. Know what else grows in the forest? Our imagination, our sense of wonder, and our family bonds grow too. Because when we disconnect from this and connect with this, we reconnect with each other and build family memories we will carry with us forever. The forest is closer than you think. Find a forest near you and start exploring at discovertheforest.org. It's easy. Just put in your zip code to find family-friendly outdoor destinations near you. You'll also find guides to free activities, games, and amazing forest facts. Give the magic of the outdoors to your kids and reconnect with your family. Find a forest near you at discovertheforest.org. That's discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the United States Forest Service and the Ad Council.
High-dollar corporate executives and Wall Street bankers keep telling us that it's lonely at the top. Well, they should try toiling at the bottom of America's pay scale. The radical rise of inequality in our society is a function of the vast political inequalities separating the working class from the power structure. The elite rich have many friends in high places, paying close attention to their needs, but the further one tumbles down the economic ladder, the lonelier you are when your interests conflict with the bosses and big shots. As Ray Charles sang, "Them that's got is them it gets." Consider waiters, bartenders, and other restaurant workers. Generally, these jobs are poorly paid and routinely abusive, yet lawmakers mostly ignore all that, cozying up to the abusers because, well, they're rich and politically connected. As a result, most of today's restaurant workers are paid a sub-minimum wage that was set 32 years ago at $2.13 an hour. That's not a wage, it's an insult. Yet most lawmakers refuse to raise it, bowing to the piles of campaign cash they get through a lobbying front called the National Restaurant Association, dominated by multi-billion-dollar food chains. Worse, in the past decade, this consortium of greedy wage suppressors even devised a diabolical scheme to make restaurant workers pay for the industry's lobbying campaigns to hold down wages. The association bought an outfit that provides hokey food safety training to workers. Then it lobbied to get California, Florida, Illinois, Texas, and other states to require that all employees not only undergo the silly online training course, but also making them pay $15 each for the training. This is Jim Hightower saying, guess what? NRA then uses these worker training fees to fund its lobbying efforts that let restaurants pay poverty wages. And that, kids, is how inequality happens.
And we're back with Leslie Marshall. Welcome back. Brad Bannon is our guest, president and CEO of Bannon Communications Research. He writes a great political column for The Hill. You can read those columns at track.com/Brad. And please check out his incredible show. He hosts Deadline DC with Brad Bannon right here every Monday, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern. Follow him on Twitter at Brad Bannon. We're talking about issues within the latest article he's written for The Hill entitled Institutional Anarchy Prevails in the GOP House. We've talked about that anarchy prevailing. We've talked about the U.S. hitting the debt ceiling and what it means for you. And we're going to talk about, a bit more, on that. So, Brad, before the break, I asked you a question. If you could answer, because everybody's been on, that cliffhanger, pins and needles, waiting to hear your reply. Sorry, we're up against a break there. Please go ahead.
Well, I think one possible resolution of this crisis would be McCarthy can't afford to lose more than 5 votes on a debt ceiling vote. And I think there are a few Republicans in the House. I call it the GOP House of Horrors. I think there are a few GOP members in the House who are scared to death of there being a government shutdown, are scared to death for the reasons you talked about before, for a cutback in Social Security and Medicare benefits. So I think the first thing is the House Democrats under the new leader, Jeffries, are going to try to force a vote on a clean debt limit ceiling without any cutbacks, and try to find 5 Republicans who will vote for it. I think that's possible. The problem is that there's a caucus of about 20 crazies in the Republican caucus. They're the ones who came close to stopping McCarthy. And there are fewer moderates in the GOP caucus, but there may be at least 5 of them. And if the new Democratic House leader, Hakeem Jeffries, can round up 5 of them and have a clean bill that would extend the debt upper the debt limit without cuts, that may be the way out of this.
I just want to mention something. Mark Grimaldi, our executive producer, said you can follow Brad on Twitter at Brad Bannon. But if you want to watch, you don't need to go to Periscope. The broadcast following you, all one shot, twitter.com/Brad Bannon. That's BradBannon, twitter.com/Bannon. Let's move to a different topic. Let's go from the economy to something that affects the economy, but even more so, it affects human lives. I'm here in California. I am in Los Angeles, and I am not far from Monterey Park and from Alhambra, and used to live in Northern California, visited Half Moon Bay for one of my birthday trips last year. Let's talk about this. There was a deadly rampage by a 67-year-old suspect in Northern California. They're saying now this was likely an act of workplace violence. There are fresh details that came out today. And this was the second back-to-back mass shooting. 18 people have been killed. And again, the nation is horrified. There were 2 shootings within 3 days. We are reeling here in the state of California. Investigators are working to identify the 11 people that were killed Saturday at the Los Angeles Dance Hall. the eve of the lunar eclipse, a very prominent holiday within the Chinese, not just Chinese though, although more specifically Chinese, but the AAPI community in general. 7 killed on Monday in the seaside town of Half Moon Bay near San Francisco. Motives are trying to be determined. They believe it's not confirmed 100% that the motive for the Northern California shooting was a workplace grievance, but still not sure about that dance hall. And so many people in that dance hall were older. I'm going to say older, but older. Preliminary evidence does indicate the massacre in Half Moon Bay does appear to be a case of workplace violence. The gunman had used a legally owned weapon, but we also know that the gunman in Monterey Park had used an illegal weapon. The suspects in both attacks are men of retirement age, much older than the typical perpetrators of deadly mass shootings that have become routine here in this country. Brad, there's so much to talk about here. Where do we go from here? I mean, the fact that you have the perpetrators older, and we have more of these shootings, and almost every time we have a shooting, it tops, if you will, it knocks off the number one or worst mass shooting, and it takes its place. Where do we go from here? People on the right have this misconception that people on the left, like you and me, want to take their guns, and that isn't the case. But, in the first shooting here closest to me in Los Angeles, this gun is, in its particular type of magazine, this particular type of clip is banned in the state of California. It's illegal. So this person obtained this illegally. And of course, there are going to be people out there that say, well, then your gun control laws don't do much because he was able to obtain it illegally. So much more needs to be done. And I have so many questions. One, is it such a headline and a common occurrence in America that people are completely desensitized by this?
Well, I don't think they're desensitized about the violence. I think what they are, sensitive to is the federal government's inability to do anything about it. I think people are horrified. If you watch the national news shows last night, the first, 7 and 10 minutes were on the 2 California shootings. And I think most Americans are horrified, and that's borne out by the polls. I think what they're more frustrated about is the federal government's lack of ability or willingness to deal with the problem. For instance, if you look at any national poll, and I guarantee you any national poll will show that at least 90% of the public want stricter standards and background checks on people for people who buy guns.
Right, and poll after poll shows the overwhelming majority want a universal background check. Yes. And election after election, you have people on the right ignoring the will of the American people, including people who write checks to their campaigns and vote for them.
Well, yeah, and that's the crazy thing. Even a vast majority of Republicans favor universal background checks. But despite that, when you try to deal with the issue, Republicans just, stand firm and vote against anything that smacks of gun control, even when it's incredibly reasonable. And just about any American favors universal background checks. But unfortunately, GOP senators and House members who are bankrolled by the National Rifle Association stand firm and won't tolerate anything, any change. Democratic presidents have tried to tighten gun laws, but they've been rebuffed by the Republicans because they're bankrolled by the National Rifle Association. I was going to say National Republican Association, but it's pretty much the same thing. And a good example, we had a federal ban on the sale of assault weapons for about 10 years between 85 and 94. And it worked. Gun shootings were down. But the first thing that the Republicans did when they took control of the House was to kill the ban. And people are getting murdered, and no one seems to care. At least Republicans don't care.
Yeah, so much to unpack here and to talk about. Let's give some more details here. On Monday, yesterday, a gunman in Half Moon Bay opened fire on employees at Mountain Mushroom Farm. This individual had previously worked there, and Concord Farms as well, about a mile away from that. The accused gunman, identified as Chunli Zhao, 67, was taken into custody later. He was found sitting in his vehicle parked outside a sheriff's station. Authorities believe he had gone there to surrender. He killed 7, wounded 1. All of his victims were Hispanic and Asian Americans, according to the San Mateo County Sheriff, Christina Corpus. That's what she told reporters today. She said, quote, "All of the evidence we have points to this being the instance of workplace violence." And the DA is expected to file charges against Zhao tomorrow morning ahead of his scheduled court appearance in Redwood City. Very quickly, Brad, why do you think it's now getting outside the typical, arena of the type of individual who pulls the trigger? Both of these men, were Asian, and both of these men were in retirement age.
Well, I think the short answer is Donald Trump. Donald Trump legitimized political violence in this country. And so there was a time when it was confined to young males. But now, I think Donald Trump created an atmosphere of, hate and horror in this country, and he essentially legitimized it. So now anybody wants to go off and they got a problem, I'll shoot my way out of the problem.
Interesting. Very interesting. We'll be back with Brad Bannon, CEO and president of Bannon Communications Research. Check out Deadline DC with Brad Bannon here, Mondays, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern. You can also check it out. Just go to twitter.com/Brad Bannon. Follow him on Twitter @Brad Bannon. You'll find all of that there. And you can read Brad's columns for The Hill. He writes a great political column. Go to muckrack.com/Brad-Bannon. I'm Leslie Marshall. We'll be back right after this, talking about the shootings that have left so many dead, back-to-back mass shootings here in the state of California, where I live and am broadcasting from today. We'll be back.
What I know about courage, I learned from my adoptive mom. She said sometimes you just gotta hold on and know we'll get through this.
Okay.
Mom, we are so high up. Hold my hand.
No, you hold my hand.
Here we go.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more.
I learned patience from my adoptive dad. All he had to say was,
"Hey, you got this. Just breathe." Hey, we're pretty good.
Yeah.
Might have to start a band.
I got it.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more. This message is brought to you by Adopt US Kids, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
COVID-19 has changed how we live and how we feel. We show up differently, worship differently, and have found new ways to express our love and support to family and friends. But now there are vaccines. And they are the first step that lets us get back into the things we miss most, like spreading the word without spreading concern.
911, what's your emergency?
America's healthcare system is broken and people are dying.
Welcome to Code WAC, where we shine a light on America's callous healthcare system, how it hurts us, and what we can do about it. I'm your host, Brenda Gazar. This time on Code WAC. What would you do if you were faced with thousands of dollars of medical debt? Would you file for bankruptcy or let the debt go to collections? What help is out there for people facing such difficult dilemmas? Would Medicare for All protect patients from the hassles and financial burdens that ill patients face? Today, we're continuing our discussion with Monique Davis, a nonprofit executive living in Southern California. She was diagnosed with amyloidosis, a rare medical condition, in 2016 that required her to have several rounds of treatment and a stem cell transplant. She had health insurance, but the treatments and multiple ambulance rides still left Monique and her husband thousands of dollars of medical debt, relentless harassment from debt collectors, and a poor credit score.
I mean, I understand that we have great care in terms of the medical providers, but the business side of it is really complex. There's no school for it. It's difficult, and it makes you feel like a failure. It makes you feel very vulnerable, and I don't trust I don't know necessarily that people are set out to hurt us, because I don't think people get into the medical field to hurt anyone. But I do think that if it's lack of automation or lack of transparency, either way, it's not for everyday people to navigate, which it's supposed to be for us to help us, right? And it's just not set up, and it's not designed for us, for the person that's receiving the care.
Get the full Code WAC story on ProgressiveVoices.com and on the PV app. Catch all our episodes by subscribing to Code WAC wherever you find your podcast. This podcast is powered by Heal California, a nonprofit that uplifts the voices of those fighting for healthcare reform around the country. Until next time, stay healthy.
Somebody wants that. We are back. We being me, Leslie Marshall, and Brad Bannon, President and CEO of Bannon Communications Research, host of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. You can see that and hear that right here every Monday, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you miss it, just go to twitter.com/Brad Bannon and also follow him on Twitter @Brad Bannon. He also writes a great political column for The Hill. You should check it out. If you don't follow The Hill @The Hill on Twitter, you can read Brad's columns at muckrack.com/Brad-Bannon. That's muckrack.com/Brad-Bannon. Brad, thank you for holding Welcome Back. We are talking about the back-to-back mass shootings here in the state of California, killed 18 so far. It's sad we lost somebody yesterday who had been badly wounded, and they lost their battle and they lost their life. President Biden said in a statement today he had been briefed on the Half Moon Bay shooting. He directed his administration to support the local authorities. And he said, quote, "Even as we await further details on these shootings, we know the scourge of gun violence across America requires stronger action." He's calling on Congress to reintroduce a federal assault weapons ban. Is that impossible with the National Republican Association, as you call it? Not just the power and the money of the NRA and their lobbying machine with regard to Republicans, but because Republicans currently have a majority in the House, will Congress not be able to reintroduce, a federal assault weapons ban unless Democrats are in power once again?
Well, the sad answer to your question is there's no chance in the world that this Congress will pass anything, a universal background check, an assault weapon ban. You know, one thing on the assault weapon ban, I talked about the fact that at least 90% of Americans favor a universal background check. A majority of Americans favor a ban on assault weapons, but it just doesn't matter, because even right now, if you could get an assault weapon ban or even a universal background check passed in the House by picking up a few Republican votes, it could not pass in the Senate because Republicans would filibuster the bill, and you'd need at least 60 votes to get an assault weapon ban, and there are only 51 Democrats. So there's no way in the world that an assault weapon ban would pass, unfortunately, and despite the fact that most Americans want one. And this is a classic instance to me where I think people get frustrated with government. Most Americans want an assault weapon ban, want American universal background checks, but the system is designed to make that almost impossible to happen, especially with the 60-vote filibuster requirement in the Senate to break filibusters.
News of the latest massacre surfaced when detectives were still investigating the Saturday night shooting at the Star Ballroom Dance Studio in Monterey Park, just east of downtown Los Angeles. The gunman killed 11 there, wounded 9. Authorities said the suspect there, Hu Can Tran, 72, then drove to a second dance hall nearby. We have to point out the club's operator, absolute hero, who wrestled his weapon away, thwarting another mass shooting there. Tran, by the way, was a longtime patron of the Star Ballroom. He fled in a white cargo van. He was cornered about 12 hours later in Torrance, south of LA, fatally shot himself there. But let's look at this lethal record. Saturday's violence unfolded in the midst of the Chinese Lunar New Year celebration I mentioned in Monterey Park. That's a huge hub of Asian Americans. You want great Chinese food, Monterey Park's one of the places you head here in SoCal. And of course, some people felt it was racially motivated till they found out that the shooter was part of the AAPI community and part of that dance community. Among the 11 victims were 2 fishermen from Taiwan, according to the Taiwanese consulate in LA, and multiple Chinese citizens, according to the Chinese consulate. Some were regulars at the dance studio, according to their family and friends. In a statement, the family of Valentino Marcos Alvaro remembered the Filipino man as the loving grandfather, the life of any party. It ranked as the deadliest mass shooting ever in LA County, according to Hilda Solis, a member of the County Board of Supervisors. By comparison, in 1984, there was a massacre of 21 people at a McDonald's restaurant in San Diego. That stands as the greatest loss of life from a single California shooting in the state. But the 2 latest shootings were also notable for the age of the suspects that we talked about, Brad, one in his late 60s, another in his early 70s. A database of 185 mass shootings between 1966 and 2022 maintained by the nonprofit Violence Project includes just one carried out by someone 70 or older. That was a retired miner who killed 5 people in Kentucky in 1981. And the LA County Sheriff Robert Luna told reporters yesterday investigators collected 42 bullet casings and a large capacity ammunition magazine from the dance studio. He said a search of the suspect's mobile home in a gated senior living community in the town of Hemet, 80 miles outside of LA, turned up a rifle, electronic devices, items that lead us to believe the suspect was manufacturing homemade weapon silencers. Police also seized hundreds of rounds of ammunition from the dwelling and a handgun from the suspect's vehicle. In Monterey Park, Police Chief Scott Weiss said investigators were looking to unconfirmed reports that violence may have been sparked by jealousy or relationship issues within that dance community. Brad, you had mentioned Donald Trump. We talk about gun control, lack thereof, and legislation. Is it also part of our culture that needs to change? Because Canada's our neighbor to the north, and per capita, they have about the same amount of gun owners, and they do not have this amount of gun violence by any stretch.
Well, they don't. And the reason why is they have universal background checks. They have a national ban on the certain kinds of weapons, neither of which we have in the United States. You know, you mentioned that at the top of this discussion that the gun that was used in the shooting over the weekend was banned in California. Well, it doesn't stop someone from going to Arizona to buying one or
gun shows.
These guns, even when they're banned in certain states and cities, are widely available by mail order. Yeah, I think Americans are in a horrible mood. If you look at any poll, you'll find that about 2/3 of Americans think the country's headed in the wrong direction. And that goes up every time there's one of those shootings. And the frustration, again, is that government is incapable of dealing with it.
Yeah, and not only that, but the solution is violence, or the solution is violence by the hand of a gun. Because of time, I want to jump onto another topic quickly, and that's what's happening in Atlanta. The Atlanta DA is pushing to keep Trump's election report secret. Can you speak to this? I mean, we know a judge heard arguments today about whether an investigative report into efforts by former President Trump and his allies to overturn the 2020 election results should be made public. Fulton County DA Fannie Willis argued that for the time being, the report should be kept secret to protect possible defendants' right to a fair trial, noting that the decisions are imminent regarding possible indictments. Media outlets, however, asking for the report's full release, given the extraordinary public interest in its findings. Is this just going to go away? Is Trump going to get away with yet something else? Because, I mean, to me, this was very concerning what happened with his phone calls and what he said to the city of Atlanta and the state of Georgia.
Yeah, this could be the case that finally nabs Trump. This is a Fulton County DA, which is Atlanta and the suburbs, met for 8 months considering the evidence. And as you said, the district attorney said that they're going to announce indictments imminently. And this could be the case that finally gets Trump because a phone call he made was incredibly blank. All you need to do is find me X number of votes and I can continue to be president. And yeah, this is a case. My guess is that the Trump lawyers are watching more carefully than they are some others, because this could be a real problem for them.
Yeah, and let's talk about why this matters. I mean, Willis's comments do provide some insight into her thinking. She's deciding whether to indict Trump or his allies after opening the investigation, to your point, Brad, 2 years ago. The report's findings are expected to influence her decision whether to indict anyone, including Trump, of criminal conduct. Of course, who would that be, if anybody? She calls for an investigative grand jury to look into the matter last year. It's a special purpose grand jury. They spent 8 months hearing from 75 witnesses. Senator Lindsey Graham was one, Rudy Giuliani was one, Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp was one. Those jurors finished their work earlier this month. They voted to publish the report. That's according to Judge Robert McBurney. He's the one hearing the case. And McBurney told lawyers today that he's going to, quote, think about this and get back to them with his decision on whether to release the report. Bottom line, less than 60 seconds. What's your prediction on this?
My prediction is that there's going to be a Trump indictment here. My guess is also indictments to Rudy Giuliani, the president's fixer, and maybe his chief of staff, Mark Meadows. This is a real big deal. This could be the biggest source of Trump's vulnerability, legal liability.
Right, because you're asking somebody to conjure up votes so that you can win. And that is unconstitutional and illegal. Double whammy there. Brad, love you. So glad to have you with us. The hour just flew by. I always enjoy having you on. We covered so much ground. Thank you for being so knowledgeable on all these issues. Brad Bannon, President and CEO of Bannon Communications Research. Check out Deadline DC, which Brad Bannon hosts right here every Monday, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern. Also, check out Brad's columns for The Hill. Great political columns. Go to muckrack.com/Brad-Bannon. That's muckrack.com/Brad-Bannon. And you can watch full shows of Deadline DC. Just follow him on Twitter at Brad Bannon or go to twitter.com/Brad Bannon. I'm Leslie Marshall. Mark Grimaldi's our executive producer. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Leslie.